28 days later begins with a bunch of chimps being force-fed violent footage. A group of activists break in to free the animals but get stopped by a scientist. He tells them not to release the monkeys as they're infected with rage. Not heeding his warning, the activists let out the chimps, which immediately attack them and infect them. Patient Zero starts to convulse on the floor as that iconic score rages through this scene, just like our first batch of victims here. 28 days literally pass by and we meet bicycle courier Jim. We get to know him pretty well considering that the second shot we get of the fella is a full frontal. He wakes up in the hospital to utter silence and no signs of life. It's almost like I've seen this before in a black and white comic that was made into an AMC show later on. I don't know. I can't pinpoint anything specifically. Jim slurps down some sodas, including the discontinued Tango that seriously ages this movie, as he heads out onto the deserted streets of London. Nearly every shot of Jim walking here is some sort of super popular location in London, like Westminster Bridge, Piccadilly Circus, Oxford Street, and even Horse Guards Parade. Where these locations are usually sprawling with busy citizens in real life, they are eerily vacant here for what is likely the most iconic sequence of the entire movie. And now I'm going to retire the word iconic for the rest of this video. Jim visits a church where a message is written on the wall. Jim learns exactly why this situation is so bleak as he dives deeper into the church, finding a few infected that start to come after him. Jim punches his ticket straight to hell as he whacks a priest in the face with his bag of tangos. Jim barely escapes the cathedral, being chased by the infected, as a group of survivors save him with some Molotov cocktails and a big ol' Michael Bay explosion, baby. Mark and Selena here take Jim to their bodega hideout, as they explain what happened in the UK in the last month. Selena says that at first it was just a few reports on TV, then it was right outside your door. She even mentions that the infection has spread to both Paris and New York City. With no government or no one else truly to save these characters, they could be the final survivors of a worldwide apocalypse. At least they have some tasty sugary snacks of Maltesers here though. The next day, Jim goes to find his parents after being told explicitly not to travel at night. Jim finds both of his parents dead in bed together after taking the easy way out. They leave him a note reading, "With endless love, we left you sleeping. Now we're sleeping with you. Don't wake up." Jim cries over what is the most hopeless note in movie history. God, I feel bad for Bicycle Boy. Selena and Mark try to comfort him as Mark explains how he survived the initial wave of infection in the first place. He just got up on top of a kiosk and watched as everyone else just kind of got ripped to shreds. Sounds like my strategy in Dead Rising 2. That night, Jim reminisces at his folks' home, remembering a time when he drank some juice with his folks. If I've learned anything about Jim throughout this movie so far, it's that he loves citrus, baby. Give me all the drinks. As a fellow drink goblin who always has to have at least 3 drinks at all times, I totally relate to Jim here. An infected Mr. Bridges sees the candlelight through the window and jumps right through it. Selena barely saves Jim by chopping up the infected, but Mark has been cut open. Without skipping a beat, Selena chops off Mark's arm and then executes him with the machete as he's a major risk of infection. Even the smallest drop of blood can turn you into one of them. Forced to travel at night now, Jim and Selena make their way back into the city. Jim asks if it was really necessary to kill Mark without knowing if he was infected or not. Selena assures him that he was and that the infection only takes 10 to 20 seconds to take form, just like how we saw in the opening scene. Okay, Selena, but like, it was about 10 seconds and Mark was still talking all normal. He was fine. I'm just saying, I think Mark was fine here. That's my conspiracy theory. Selena makes it very clear to Jim that if he ever gargles infected blood, she'll do the same to him. They discover a high-rise apartment building where the balcony has a bunch of blinking Christmas lights on it. With hopes of finding other survivors, they head inside. After climbing over a shopping cart barricade, the two head up the stairs. Jim takes a break because he of course needs a tasty drink. He was only ever thinking about drinking juice a second ago, so he's gotta crack open a Tango right now. Selena sadly only has Lil and Pepsi, no fucking Tango. Although Jim is incredibly disappointed by this and probably thinks less of Selena here, I'm totally kidding. She does have painkillers though, so at least it's a party, baby. The infected interrupt their soda sipping as the two start racing upstairs. Selena practically leaves Jim behind here as they run into a man wearing riot gear. He lets them pass, disappointing Gandalf of course, as he tells them to head to apartment 157. He fends off the infected and tells his daughter to let their new guests in. They introduce themselves as Frank and Hannah, two survivors making do in their little flat. Frosty the Snowman hilariously plays over the sequence that is lit up by string lights. They share a toast to surviving as Jim goes to shape up in the bathroom. Finally, this dude gets a haircut. My God, was it overdue. Frank tells Jim that they're low on water, as exemplified by this terrifying shot of a goldfish in a tank that's nearly drained. It's suffocating, just like the situation that our characters find themselves in. Realizing that they have to leave their humble high-rise abode, Frank shows the group a recording being broadcast over the radio. It's a group of soldiers hiding out in Manchester, saying they can keep people safe and have the answer to infection. Selena doesn't want to risk it going on such a treacherous journey, but Hannah says they have to, otherwise they're just gonna starve to death in this apartment. They all decide to hop into Frank's taxi as they hit the road. This is a road trip zombie movie now. I really have to agree with Jim here that it's a super dumb idea for them to take a dark tunnel out of the city filled with smashed cars and broken glass. They drive over a makeshift ramp made up of wrecked vehicles, leading to the taxi's driver's side wheel to go flat. Jim and I told you so. They all get out of the car to repair the broken tire as rats start to rush underneath their feet. The infected have heard their Evel Knievel stunt and start to race after them into the tunnel. What is easily one of the most high-tension scenes in the entire movie results in the group just barely getting away with a spare at the last second. To celebrate that close W, the group stops at the grocery store to pick up some supplies. We see the group bond here, becoming a family for one of my favorite scenes of the entire film. Frank educates Jim on the right kinds of liquor to take as he hilariously walks away mid-conversation, and Selena indulges in some chocolate-covered oranges. The scene concludes with a great shot of Frank leaving his credit card at the checkout. Out of the city now, they stop for gas at a petrol station just off of the M1 motorway. On a quest for the final cheeseburger in the UK, Jim goes inside the station, seeing a bunch of dead bodies, including a mother holding a baby. Yikes. He's attacked by the world's stealthiest little infected boy. Jim puts the kid out of his rage-filled misery and doesn't tell the group about this. The family stops at Waverly Abbey for the night, where they watch wild horses run free. Selena even steals a little kiss from Jim as she starts to soften up. Everyone's getting a little flaccid that night as Frank gives pain medication to his daughter after a bit of begging. That's the worst sentence I've ever written for a video ever. Jim calls him a softie as he heads to sleep. That night, Jim has a nightmare that everyone's left him there. When Frank awakes him, telling him he's just having a bad dream, Jim says, "Thanks, Dad," in another really heartfelt scene. The family discovers Manchester on fire, being stopped at the bridge before the 42nd blockade, where the soldiers said they'd be. It appears as if everyone is already left, with a bunch of discarded military vehicles all over the highway. Frustrated, Frank takes out his anger on a crow that's nibbling on an infected body on a bridge above. When he kicks it, a single drop of blood hits him in the eye, infecting him. He uses his final moments to tell Hannah he loves her and to push her away, just in case he starts to attack her. Selena screams at Jim,
"Jimmy's infected! No! Jim!"
But before he can do anything, the military show up and shoot Frank down. The military escort the remaining three to their hideout at Trafalgar Park in Wiltshire. The group mourns Frank, and Selena is especially distraught, feeling bad for Hannah. Major Henry West tells Jim that although his small militia here may seem disappointing, his family is protected by them, and he's slowly working on the answer to infection. He says that his compound is dedicated to rebuilding civilization. They even have hot water, clean sheets, and Jones in the kitchen cooking up a surprise, baby. His stupid smile here always makes me laugh. Henry then introduces Jim to Mailer, an infected soldier that he's got chained up in a courtyard. Henry says that he's learned a lot about the infected from Mailer and wonders how long it will take for him to starve to death. They have dinner that night, and Jones's surprise sadly turns out to be expired egg omelets. Ugh. The soldiers discuss over dinner how life hasn't really changed for them during this infection. For them, life has already been adjusted to people killing people. An infected then trips a landmine in the front lawn, sending the soldiers to their feet to defend the mansion. They clear out the rest of the infected, but it gives Jim and Selena a bad vibe when they especially celebrate another infected blowing up into pieces. When the soldiers come back in, they aggressively hit on Selena, and Henry decides to cut that out. He apologizes to Jim about the encounter, even though he probably should be apologizing to Selena, and pours him a glass of the same whiskey that Frank had salvaged from the store earlier. He admits that the broadcast was made with the intention of luring in female survivors, so his men could could procreate. He explains that even if the infected starve out, what are 9 men to do here with no hope of a future? Jim races out, realizing that he has to save Hannah and Selena, not before a soldier can knock him out, however. Sergeant Farrell here actually has a moral compass and thinks forcing people into that sort of fucked up slavery is wrong. He tries to perform a mutiny here by protecting Selena and Hannah from the other soldiers, but that doesn't work out very well for him. Jim and Sergeant Farrell end up tied to 2 different radiators in some sort of shed to be executed the next day. Here, Sergeant Farrell tells Jim that it's just the British Isles that have been quarantined because of the infection. He relays this by going on this crazed rant about how families across the pond are likely watching The Simpsons together right now as they suffer. The 2 are taken into the woods to be shot, but Sergeant Farrell pisses the one soldier off by spitting in his face. The soldier decides he's gonna stick him with a bayonet instead of just painlessly putting him down with some bullets. The other soldier there, though, decides to shoot Sergeant Farrell down. This results in some bickering between the military men as Jim has a chance to escape. Thinking he's gone, the soldiers run into the woods, but Jim was only ever hiding in the pile of bodies there. Jim escapes, but not without losing his shirt on some barbed wire. Damn, Zaddy. Over the wall, with potential infected nearby, Jim starts to run, but falls down and notices a plane up in the sky. The sergeant must have been telling the truth, and there is actually hope in this very hopeless situation. Maybe Jim has a future of watching The Simpsons with Selena one day.
A little tip, you might want to wash me before you eat me.
The soldiers force Selena and the very underage, may I remind you, Hannah, to put on some dresses so they can... you know. Before anything can happen, thank God, Jim makes an air raid siren go off, alerting the soldiers to his location back on the highway to Manchester. He transcends from a gray wizard to a white wizard here, as the Jiminator effortlessly kills a soldier looking for him like he's fucking John Wick. The soldiers better hope he never gets his hands on a pencil. Major West gets separated from the group and a bunch of infected start to go after him. Night falls and Jim makes it back to the compound to save Selena and Hannah. Here, he recklessly shoots off the chain that's holding Mailer down in the courtyard so that he can just kind of run in there and infect anyone, maybe even Selena and Hannah, dude. Jim has lost his fucking mind. After Hannah delivers a terrifying little monologue about how the rest of the militia is likely dead, Mailer busts through a window attacking one of them. Mailer doesn't just bite this guy, he pukes up a bunch of infected blood all over him as the infection spreads throughout the entire compound. Hannah and Selena retreat back into the mansion as Jim kills that same soldier from earlier with a bayonet. The Jiminator's reign of terror continues as he just leaves one soldier behind for the infected to take out, and then pushes his fingers into the eyes of the douche canoe that was restraining Selena. Corey Taylor would be so proud. Selena nearly kills Jim here, thinking he's infected, because again, he's acting like a maniac. But thankfully, she steadies her hand at the last minute. Jim exclaims that it's not all fucked, they can still be saved. Hannah hilariously smashes a bottle over his head at this point though, and Jim asks if she's stoned. The answer is surprisingly yes. Selena gave her some of Frank's medication earlier on. As they get to Frank's taxi, Major West is hiding in the back and shoots Jim. Hannah, already in the driver's seat, does some of her crazy moves, another thing that was set up with this character earlier on, as the infected Mailer gets an opportunity to pull Major West through the back window of the taxi out. This hungry infected finally gets to nibble on his captor. Selena rushes Jim into the back seat of the taxi as Hannah drives them through a chained up gate. It appears as if they crash as we cut to another 28 days later title card. It's revealed that Jim survived after Selena desperately fixed him up. They're hiding out in a cottage in the country as it's shown that the infected are starving out in the streets. Major West was an asshole, but he was surprisingly right about that one thing. The family has created a massive sign reading hello as planes fly over. The movie ends as the family is seemingly rescued. Now let's talk about 28 things you might have missed in 28 Days Later. The violent footage being shown to the ape at the beginning of the film was inspired by the Cry Freetown documentary made by Sorius Samira. The doc captures the violence and victims of the Civil War at the time. My interpretation of this opening sequence, especially based on what the scientist tells us, is that what the monkeys are infected with is just boiled down elemental rage. Well, that and Ebola mixed together apparently, as explained in the comic book 28 Days Later Aftermath. On top of that Aftermath comic, there's also 6 different volumes of a 28 Days Later series that ran from 2010 to 2011. That series takes place place shortly after the events of 28 Days Later following Selena. I might cover that story someday. The scientist from the opening scene is played by comedic actor David Schneider, whose career is all over the place. He's in everything from Mr. Bean to Mission Impossible. Jim was originally supposed to be played by Ewan McGregor, but he denied the role after getting replaced on Boyle's previous film The Beach by Leonardo DiCaprio. Also, Ryan Gosling was supposed to play this role after him, but he turned it down due to a scheduling conflict. So Obi-Wan Kenobi and Just Ken were supposed to play these roles before Oppenheimer. I made a joke earlier that The Walking Dead sort of ripped some stuff from this movie, like Jim waking up in the hospital, or many similarities between the characters of Selena and Michonne. Interestingly enough though, 28 Days Later kind of borrows that opening sequence of Jim waking up in the middle of some crazy apocalypse from the movie The Day of the Triffids, which is also based on the book of the same name. That film and book starts off with a meteor shower that blinds the entire world as this plant virus rages through it. Our main character in that, however, was having eye surgery, and they had like bandages all over their eyes, meaning they didn't get blinded. It's crazy to think how far back these influences go. A lot of scenes in 28 Days Later are based on real war or violent political photography that director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland had researched beforehand. The scene where Jim picks up what seems like worthless money in this new world is based on a photograph taken in Cambodia during the overthrow of Pol Pot in 1979. The gas station explosion is based on a photograph taken in Ireland during a bomb dropping, and the entire church scene was based on pictures of bodies piling up in Sierra Leone and Rwanda. A lot of this movie seems to be commentary on real-life rage leading to mass casualty. Speaking of that gas station explosion, although all of the permits were filed so that the crew could blow up the Canary Wharf petrol station, the police came out to see what had happened anyways, not being notified that it was going to happen. I guess Danny Boyle had to deal with a lot of pissed off cops for several hours. Unlike the majority of productions, 28 Days Later was shot almost entirely in sequence outside of a few reshoots. After some negative test screenings, they asked to reshoot the ending, and the studio finally coughed up the cash so that we could get this sequence of the family getting saved at the end. We'll talk more about some of those alternate endings in a second here. 28 Days Later was shot exclusively on DV cameras, which is why it looks very flat. That was done on purpose according to director Danny Boyle, who wanted this movie to feel like footage that would have came out of some sort of apocalypse at the time. That's why they used an older camera, a Super 8 in particular, for the flashback sequence, and why 28 years later, a sequel that would come out many years later, was shot almost entirely with iPhones. Selena is very pragmatic and pessimistic when we first meet her, and although we don't hear much about her backstory in the film itself, director Danny Boyle and actress Naomie Harris came up with one to flesh out her closed-off personality. So I guess when the infected began to take over, Selena found her parents infected and had to kill them. She did this in particular to save her baby brother, who sadly she didn't get to in time and is already infected. If they ever film something like that, it could be the most brutal thing to ever come out of this franchise. I hope we see Selena again in some new movies coming up here. The scene where Jim, Selena, Frank, and Hannah all celebrate in their flat was shot on September 11th of 2001. Not only was it odd to film a celebration sequence on such a disastrous day, but it also felt oddly in tune with the rage that this movie is trying to condemn. Wow, those last 2 points were really dark, so let's do a fun one. The word fuck is uttered 61 times in this movie. The rain catcher scene features a hamper with open slits that many have made fun of online. People have pointed this out as a plot hole, but I strongly disagree with that. I think this just adds to the desperation of the situation. If you've ever picked up one of those before too, you know that the bottom like is all solid plastic. It probably would have picked up like a little bit of rainwater, and man, that would have gone a long way in this apocalypse, dude. In my opinion, it's a bigger plot hole to say, why is it not raining in the UK? Doesn't it do that there like all the fucking time? Jim foreshadows saving Selena at Frank's flat, where Selena says that she would leave Frank and Hannah behind if they slowed her down. Jim says he wouldn't do that and would try to save them because they're people. He makes true on this later on, going back in the third act to save Hannah and Selena. Frank foreshadows his own demise, saying that he couldn't leave the high-rise with just him and Hannah, worried that something could happen to him, leaving Hannah to fend for herself. In order to shoot scenes in some of the most popular places in London made completely desolate, the city sectioned off these areas for only 45 minutes at a time. If you've ever been on a film shoot before, you know that's really only enough time to like set a few things up, get one 1, maybe 2 takes if you're lucky, and then clean up. I can't even imagine how stressful those shoots were. There's also a scene where Jim walks by a red double-decker bus here. They were denied permission by the Westminster City Council to place that bus there, but they did it anyways during a quick 4 a.m. shoot. The council was probably still in bed then. Writer Alex Garland has said that 28 Days Later is inspired by toxic zombie flicks like Night of the Living Dead or the video game Resident Evil. But his spin on it is that the infected are simply taken over by psychological aggression that spreads in a similar way. That's why a lot of film nerds will leave comments on videos like this saying, actually, they're not zombies, they're infected people. Those annoying commenters do have a point though. Technically, this isn't a rotting corpse that has been reanimated and just walking around trying to bite people. These are actual people still alive, but just having their rage inhibitors turned up to 11 and literally everything else at 0. But like, they're still zombies at the end of the day, just a little different. Alex Garland wanted to work with Danny Boyle again after he directed a feature version of his book, The Beach. They've gone on to make a bunch of different projects together, including 2007's Sunshine, which also stars Cillian Murphy, and 2025's sequel to this film, 28 Years Later. They'll also be working together soon on the recently greenlit third entry in the 28 Years series. 28 Days Later also has multiple alternate endings, only one of which was actually shot, where Jim simply dies after the gunshot wound. There was also another one where Jim has a dream of the accident that sent him into a coma before he wakes up in the hospital. Then there's also an entire reworking of the third act where Jim dies because of a blood transfusion he undergoes in order to save Frank. Frank doesn't get shot in this alternate version, rather being tied up after getting infected. Personally, I think the ending we got was the best one. There is this element of hope in the film, even though so much of it feels pessimistic. If Jim dies, so does your representation of hope. I think that was 28 facts. At least I've literally tallied up 28 in my notes. At the very least, I just hope you learned something. The draw to 28 Days Later is obviously the action-packed running zombie sequences, but what gives it staying power is its commentary. You get this sense of loneliness and existential dread from the film, this feeling of helplessness like the world has left these characters behind. With so much of this film's influences being war photography, I think 28 Days Later is trying to recreate the feeling of the people who have had to go through political violence. It's using zombies or an infection as an analogy for the rage that can spread to cause these kinds of things in the first place. It's also a very well-written movie with characters you grow to love, emotional deaths that show how low your probability of survival is in this situation, and some scary fucking running zombies. I've always had an issue with running zombies because I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for like a reanimated corpse to be running around with its muscles literally deteriorating, but it's cool that 28 Days Later not only uses its infection as a way to comment on things in the world, but also to subvert that criticism. These people are still alive. I would go so far as to say that this idea of zombies is even scarier than anything in a Romero movie. Like, if you get infected, your body is basically a prison. Like, there's still a soul inside of there committing these atrocities. Even if they do end up finding a cure in a future movie, these people are gonna have to live with those memories of all the terrible things they did while they were infected. That is a suffocating fate worse than death. I also love how British this movie is. I had to Google so many things because I just didn't get a lot of these references as a dumb American. Because of this video, I learned what a Marks and Spencer's is. Never knew about that store before. I don't think we have those here in America. Getting back on track here though, I think that this movie is still considered a classic because you can enjoy it as a popcorn zombie movie that's filled with tension, but if you want to look deeper, there's this horrifying simulation of what it's like to live through these things that people in first world countries only ever hear about on the news. In turn, I also think it's very powerful that you're having this apocalyptic event happen just quarantined to the British Isles. 28 Years Later, a film we're going to cover later on, kind of expands on these ideas and how the rest of the world essentially forgets about England for that same reason. It's just so fucked there, the rest of the world doesn't know what to do with that. Sadly, this is what happens with a lot of third world countries all the time. The film seems to dig into the hopelessness of losing your family, friends, and country all at the same time to something you barely even understand. It gives the audience that same feeling of hopelessness, so like, you have to have this triumphant ending, otherwise I don't think people would be coming back to this one too many times. That's not to say that a film shouldn't make you feel bad bad. Films should elicit all kinds of different emotions, not just happiness, joy, excitement, whatever. But I think this is an easier watch because the movie ends that way, and I also think it's an important message to be a part of a film like this, to say that yes, there is hope. Help will come eventually. There's an optimistic sense of morality about this film that's a sweet juxtaposition with the bitter helplessness. I think that 28 Days Later successfully gets away with having its cake and eating it too. I love this movie though. I think it's one of the best infection zombie movies, whatever. I'm sure y'all are gonna come at me at the comments about that, but they're zombies, just a little different. Guys, we are covering the entire 28 Blank Later franchise this month, leading up to 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. I am so excited to get into it. What do you guys think about 28 Days Later, and are you excited to see the next video on 28 Weeks? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.